Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. I'm delighted to welcome back tonight a gentleman who has spoken to this course for a number of years now. It's on a topic that you might not have thought would belong in a course like this, negotiations. But one of the students that we worked with many years ago spun a company out of the university. After the first year, he came back and he said, you know what the most important thing that I have learned in this past year? He said, that's how to negotiate. And nobody had ever told me about that before. It made me realize it is a core skill. And as I said, delighted to have Michael Erdle back. Michael is a managing partner with Deeth Williams Wall, which is a Toronto technology and intellectual property firm. I guess Michael's practice is primarily in the areas of information technology and IP, but I've worked with Michael and Cynthia, our co-founder of the course here, worked with Michael with a life sciences company. So he is a little more general than his bio would give you credit for. He's worked on tech development, licensing, technology transfers, joint ventures, but he has a special interest now in negotiation, mediation, and the skills around that area. So, without further ado, Michael, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Tony. And as Tony said, my bio focuses on information technology. That's what I do most of the time. But I do other areas of technology as well. I've done pretty much any kind of licensing over the last 20 years, and a lot of work on negotiation. So what I'm going to try to do this evening is provide you with some practical advice, and the quote there I like very much. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there's a big difference. So I'm going to talk about some negotiation problems, and try to talk about how you might experience some of those in your day-to-day activities, and focus on the kinds of problems that entrepreneurs face. A little bit about some of the negotiation skills and techniques that you can learn, and a little bit about, at the end, about dispute resolution, because as Tony said, I am very interested in mediation, facilitated negotiation, and dispute management and resolution, particularly in the technology area, and particularly relating to entrepreneurs and startup companies, and that area. So, why do we negotiate? And we negotiate all the time. You learned how to negotiate before you learned how to talk, I think. When you were hungry, you cried, and your mother fed you, and that's a whole negotiation process. Particularly for those who are mothers, you know how much sometimes you don't want to do it, but you do anyway, because there's a need, there's a want there, and we negotiate to get things that we need and things that we want. And I'll talk about the difference between those two as we go along. We negotiate to reduce or resolve conflicts. And some people, what you naturally think about when you talk about negotiation, and what first comes to mind is conflict and negotiation. Mideast peace negotiations, and on the very grand scale, and all kinds of other negotiations down to your daily life. But it's not just about conflict. You also negotiate to create value and to increase value in a situation, and I'll talk a lot about that over the next hour or so. And you negotiate to enhance your prestige and reputation. A lot of negotiation is about personal value, self-esteem, and a lot of the negotiation dynamic relates to that. and I'll talk about that as well. So everything can be negotiated. And we, as I said before, we negotiate all the time. And I'll focus probably more on business relationships. And so there's all kinds of business negotiations, and this is Entrepreneurship 101, so that'll be the focus. Excuse me. But you should also recognize and learn from your experience in negotiating personal relationships. Everything from deciding to go to a movie or go out for dinner. My favorite, because I have 3 teenage daughters, relates to negotiating over who can use the car. And if you want a tough negotiator, negotiate with a teenager. They don't back down. At least my daughters don't, which is great. But they learn negotiation. That's how they learn. And we all learn negotiation through our personal experience and our personal lives. And there's multiple levels to any negotiating relationship. There's the surface level, and that's about specific products, services, actions. You want to buy something. That's the explicit level of the negotiation, but there's also an underlying implicit level. And that's about controlling personal feelings and behavior, getting people to do what you want. And those who are in sales and have taken sales training, I mean, there's a lot of things to learn about how you negotiate in that dynamic, and it's about understanding what people want and need, and showing them that they need and want what you're selling. So it's sometimes that can seem manipulative. It can feel manipulative when you're trying to do it, but you have to understand that a lot of the negotiation dynamic is about people and how they feel and how they act in that situation. And so the negotiator, a good negotiator, has to recognize both those visible and those hidden elements of a negotiation. And in any organization, and for you, I've been thinking about entrepreneurs, and starting a company, dealing with others who you need for support for what you're trying to do, you have to understand the underlying elements that cause them to behave the way they do. You're negotiating for research facilities at Mars. You need to understand what drives Mars, what they're looking for, what creates the prestige or enhances their reputation on having a successful startup company in a particular field using their facilities. And all of those elements, and none of them may be explicitly stated ever in the discussion, but they're there, and you have to understand them to negotiate successfully for what you want. So that's what I mean when I talk about both the explicit, the obvious elements, and the hidden elements of a negotiation. So I'll start with some of the things that you should definitely not do. The first one is to simply assume that things are non-negotiable. And a lot of that is just cultural. If you go to a market, a flea market here or in some other country, you assume that you're going to negotiate. You would never pay the asking price. I've been to the silk market in Beijing, and you hardly have to negotiate. There's a price, And as soon as you take another step, there's another price, which is half of the first price. And you take 2 more steps. It's a very effective negotiation. You just have to keep walking. You don't have to say anything. Here, though, if you go into the Bay, you assume that the price is not negotiable. Why do you assume that? Often the price is negotiable. You pick up a floor model and you go to the clerk and you say, well, this one's kind of scratched. Can you give me 20% off? They will. But if you assume it's not negotiable and you don't ask, you won't get. So one of the first things in negotiation is ask. The other mistakes that people make, they don't prepare adequately. And I'll talk a lot about some of the things that you should look at. But just simply walking in and sitting down and negotiating without preparing, you're doomed to fail. The other thing is mistake people make is making it a zero-sum game, assuming that whatever I gain, the other person will lose, and vice versa. And even worse, assuming that whatever they gain, I will lose. So you resist anything, you resist giving anything away because you think that you're just losing each time. And in fact, and I'll talk a lot about this, it's not a zero-sum game. If you can increase the size of the pie, everybody can benefit. Being inflexible is another mistake. I mean, you come in and you sit like this and you say, well, no, that doesn't work. You have to be flexible, you have to be willing to listen, and you have to be willing to react, and you have to be able to change your objectives as necessary and within limits. And we'll talk about how you set those limits. Certainty and control. I mean, if you're absolutely determined to plan everything in advance and get exactly what you want, you're not going to be successful in negotiating, because you have to be, as I say, you have to be flexible, but you have to be willing to let the other person control some aspects of the negotiation. You have to be willing to let them lead at times, because they have to get what they want too. Failing to understand and evaluate the alternatives. I mean, there are always alternatives. And for all of you, I mean, anybody in looking at startup companies and kind of the entrepreneurship kind of model, or if you're involved in research, if you're involved in working with startup companies, you have to understand that there's always alternatives for everybody. You've got alternatives, and all the people that you're dealing with have got alternatives. You have to be better than their alternative. And understanding what those are makes you much more effective. Being impatient is a sure loser. If you're anxious, we got to get a deal, you're going to end up with less than the ideal result, because there just simply isn't time and effort put into looking at all the alternatives. And revealing too much too soon. I mean, laying all your cards on the table is just as bad as keeping all the information hidden. You're not going to get anywhere with either of those strategies, or you're not going to be as effective with either of those strategies as if you you dole out bits of information as it benefits you in your negotiation. So there's all kinds of things that we do without thinking about it that kind of sabotages our efforts to negotiate in a lot of situations. So when you're looking at a situation where you're negotiating something, and we can talk about negotiating again for space here, or services from some other supplier, or a joint venture partnership, working together with somebody to launch your company or your work. You have to identify what the issues are. It's not just about what their position is on something. It's about the issues and the underlying wants and needs. And there's two very different things there. When you're negotiating, you ask, obviously, for what you want, what your ideal outcome is, what the best possible solution is for you. Behind that are the things that you actually need. So I may want a new car. What I really need is a car so I can get to work, or a Metro Pass so I can get to work. I maybe don't actually need the car at all. All I need is transportation. What I want is a new car. So what I'm negotiating for is a new car. But I have to understand what my needs really are, to understand what the bottom line is and what I can accept. At the same token, if I'm negotiating with my employer for a car allowance and I'm asking for a new car, they may realize, they should realize and understand that I don't need a new car. A used car is fine, and half of the amount I'm asking for to pay for it is going to be sufficient, and that's all they need to give me. And that'll be the negotiation. Is it, is it $700 a month or $500 a month for a new car? Is it a lump sum to buy a used car? What do I really need? In the negotiation, you look at interests, and there's a lot of information on and research on negotiation. And one of the big things that in negotiating, you separate out the interests from the positions. I mean, the position I take in my negotiation for the car is, I want a new car. I need it. I want it. Give me enough money to pay for a new car. Underlying that, though, and that's just a position. I mean, it's negotiable. But underlying that is the interest in having reliable transportation, and my boss in making sure that I get to work on time. And so they want to pay the minimum amount that they need to, so that I have a car and I can get to work on time or go out on sales calls or meet clients or whatever it is that I need to do. And in all of that, we have got mutual interests, my boss and I, in this car. The mutual interest is in some sort of reliable transportation so I can get to where I need to be on time. They want me to be there. I want to be there. So we have a mutual interest. We also have some complementary interests. I want something that's comfortable and nice to drive and kind of looks kind of sporty, and maybe I'd rather have red than another color. And their interest is that they want something that's reliable and runs and doesn't break down all the time. Those aren't mutual interests at all, but they may well be complementary, because they may get us to the same place as a decent car that runs pretty well. And then there's conflicting interests. So with the car, I want, I want the Porsche so that, it looks good. I don't care how much it costs. But that's what I want, and of course my boss wants to pay a lot less than the cost of a Porsche, so they offer me a 6-year-old Volkswagen. And we've got conflicting interests there. I mean, I want the nicest car possible, and they want to spend the least amount of money possible within the limits of our complementary interests, which is something that runs half decently. Now, if I can shift my boss's thinking so that I can convince them that it really is in the company's interest that I drive the Porsche, because it'll look like the company's much more successful, and we're doing really well, and I'm going out to meet investors and raise money, and so it would probably help. And then he says, well, no, we don't want the investors to think we're spending all our money on Porsches. We want them to think we're spending all the money in the lab, so forget it. And so it goes. And in the end, we come to some sort of balance about all of these different interests, which I hope ends up with me getting a car and without putting the company into bankruptcy. And the important thing in that is just recognizing that there are different interests. Some of them are mutual, some of them are complementary, and so they can mesh together if we do it right. And some of them are just, the dollars, plus or minus, are just conflicting. I mean, there's no way that we're going to change that. But we can try to do it in a way that, that creates value. And so I'm going to talk a fair bit about the different kinds of negotiation of distribution and increasing value, and how that can affect the outcome of the negotiation. So if it's a situation that's purely distributive, it's just simply win-lose. The more money I spend on buying something, the less money I have, so I want the price to be lower. And it really, nothing else really matters to me other than the price. Now, in a zero-sum game, you have to realize kind of the fundamental truth that whoever makes the first offer is at a disadvantage. Which you should remember next time you go into a department store or a grocery store, is that they're at a disadvantage. They've already set the price. You can negotiate from there. You don't go in and say, oh, I'd like a new TV, and they say, oh, yeah, okay, well, make me an offer. How do you know how much to offer for the TV? So in that kind of negotiation, the person who makes the first offer, they start at a disadvantage because they've set the outer limits. I might be willing to pay $10,000 for that TV just because I am, and they've got it up on the wall with a price tag on it that says, on sale for $9.95. The other thing that you can do with a zero-sum negotiation is that you can improve your position by understanding your objectives better and taking time to really understand them and your alternatives, but also, more importantly, understanding the other side's objectives and what their alternatives are. So again, if the negotiation is just simply over the price of a product or service, and my objective is to get a new flat screen TV. I mean, I can improve that immensely by just simply looking online at all of the different prices and who, Best Buy's got it on sale this week, or somebody else has got it on sale, and buy it there. I mean, it's a zero-sum game. That anything that I can do to reduce the price, and then I go to the one that's selling it a little bit more and say, these other guys are selling it for a little bit less, can you beat their price? And then I get the price even lower than the best advertised price. And my objective is just get the cheapest price. Their objective is to move TVs. And as long as the price that I'm offering is slightly more than it will cost them to get in another TV to replace the inventory, they're better off. So, in negotiating to buy a car, there's a lot of research sites available. What is the dealer price? Because the dealer invoice cost, and what rebates are available, and all of the research that you do to improve your position versus the car salesman who knows all of this information and relies on the fact that you don't to sell you a car at a price that's more than you really need to pay. So information, understanding the objectives, understanding what the other side's objectives, understanding that if you go into the car dealer on the 30th of the month and the salesperson has got a quota that they have to meet to keep their job, and they just need to sell one more car that month or to earn a bonus, they're going to sell you a car cheaper than they would sell it to you for tomorrow or the next day. But that's understanding their objectives. They need to sell a car today to make a bonus. There's lots of hard bargaining ploys. There's lots of ways that people will try to get an advantage, particularly in the zero-sum kind of relationship. And I've listed some of them here. There are others, and I'll just really quickly talk about a few of these. Kind of the extreme claims and small concessions. I mean, how much is that? $100. Well, I'll give you 5. And then you go from there. The one, say, well, 95. Well, they've gone down 5. Okay, I'll go up 4. And then you see where that's going. I mean, it's just a matter of time. But if you go up, if they come down 5 and you go up 10, you know where that's going to lead to, right? Kind of the early commitment. I mean, this is. I mean, you really kind of stake. You drive a hard stake in the ground, and you say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. There's the offer, and my hands are tied, and sorry. And so then, how do you negotiate against that? You do it by trying to shift the ground, by trying to say, well, okay, you can't do that. What about doing this, or some other thing, or maybe if we did it this way, or here's another alternative. And their hands can't be tied forever over everything. Kind of the take it or leave it offer. I think all of us have seen. There's an easy response to that. Negotiate with that. You say, oh, okay, bye. I'm leaving it. Better luck. Maybe later. But if the offer is take it or leave it, you always leave it. Unreciprocated offers is something. I mean, there are people that try to get you to negotiate against yourself. If you go into the car dealer and whatever they want for the new car, and you say no, that's too much, and the salesman will say, well, okay, so how much do you want to pay? And you name a price you think is way too low. And the salesman goes off into a back room to eat with their manager, and you know that there's nobody there, right? Everybody knows that? But they're fighting for you, right? The salesman's on your side. And then they come back and says, no, the manager says, no, can't do it. Can you offer? Can you pay more? What can you do? And so then you say, well, okay, well, I'll offer whatever it was plus $1,000. You're just negotiating with yourself, right? Right? So, I mean, that's a typical play. I mean, if you can get somebody to just negotiate with themselves and keep improving the offer without making a counteroffer, you're doing great. The other one is great is increasing demands. And I mean, the typical one, and I deal with this in the IT field all the time, where the people who are selling hardware and software come in and say, well, until November 15th, we've got this great deal, and we've got this offer that's, we've got discounts, we've got all this program, but of course after that, the price is going up, and you don't believe them, you let the time go by. And of course, what are they going to do on November 16th? They say, oh, I'm sorry, I told you on the 15th that was that was the deadline, and now the price is so much more. But if we kind of do this and this, maybe I can get you the discount anyway. Well, it's just smoke and mirrors. The price didn't really go up. I mean, there was a price. And if they could have done it till the 15th, they could have done it on the 16th and in December and probably in January too. But you increase the demand, you set a higher threshold, and then you negotiate from there. Insults, bluffing and lying. I mean, all kinds of personal stuff that people do. Threats, warnings. If you don't agree to this, the roof is going to fall in. Company negotiating with the union, well, if we can't settle the strike, we're going to close the plant. And sometimes those threats and warnings are true, but often they're not. But it's an effective tactic that you have to be able to counter with some other alternative. I mean, and the other, another way to, that's commonly used, that I've called attacking the alternatives. And that's where you kind of put an offer on the table, and then when somebody makes a counteroffer, you don't really negotiate over it. You just attack the counteroffer. You just hammer in on all of the things that are wrong with their position, with their offer, with what they want to do, and then they're left with what you've put on the table. And so you're not really negotiating between them. You're just trying to kick the legs out from under the alternative, and the only thing left standing then is the offer that you've made. Or, and then the good cop, bad cop. I mentioned that the car salesman. I mean, it's a great technique, and it's a good, it's a great technique in all kinds of negotiations and companies. I mean, I'd love to do that, but my CEO won't go for that. We got to do something better. I'd like to help you, but the CFO won't approve that budget item. I mean, there's always a bad cop somewhere in the background. One of the things, if you're going to use that, try to make sure the bad cop stays in the background, because if they come to the table and kind of completely wilt and cave, I mean, having two good cops at the table is disaster. So what are the alternatives to those kinds of negotiation dynamics and those kinds of positional hard bargaining kind of tactics? And the alternative is interest-based negotiation. And that involves trying to make, trying to make the pie bigger. And it doesn't work for everything. You have to realize that as much as and people advocate interest-based negotiation and kind of win-win situation, there's a lot of situations that aren't win-win. If somebody tries to tell you something's a win-win situation and you know that it's not, you have to call them on it. I mean, there are some situations where, I gain, you lose. Sorry, that's the way it is. And next time, maybe I'll try to make it up to you. But there are a lot of situations where the win-win approach does work. You can make the pie bigger. You can recognize particularly that different people value the same thing differently. And the classic story is the head chef, the restaurant, comes in one night, and the dessert chef and one of the other sous chefs are fighting over a case of lemons. And goes up to them, what's the problem here? And the dessert chef says, well, I'm making a meringue. I need the case of lemons. And the other chef says, well, I'm making a lemon soup, and I need this case of lemons. What's the answer? It's pretty simple. The dessert chef, what does he need? He needs the rinds to make zest for the meringue. The other guy needs the juice. There's a case of lemons. You can take the juice, give the other guy the rinds. They're both happy. And it's a silly story, but it's true. I mean, there's a lot of situations where you can split a case of lemons, and one person gets the juice and one gets the rinds, and they're both perfectly happy. And you have increased the size of the pie. You've created value where it didn't exist before, instead of just fighting over how many lemons do I get versus how many lemons do you get. We can both have all of them. But it's very difficult to find those situations in real life. You have to really look hard for them. And you have to understand that there are multiple interests, there are multiple trade-offs, and you have to recognize the interdependence of people and the relationship that makes all of those trade-offs worthwhile. And obviously in the kitchen, the chefs have got to work together, and tomorrow they'll be arguing over a case of some other fruit, and they need to get along. So it's in their interest, it's worth their time and effort to sit down and say, well, how can we make the maximum use of this? And the same happens in all kinds of situations, business situations. And you have to understand then, you have to value the relationship more than the outcome of a single negotiation. In the kitchen, it might have been perfectly fine for one of the guys to just grab the case and run off and not tell the other, or to do something else to just get what they want. But if there's an ongoing relationship there, that in the end is more damaging than the benefit they get, and it makes it worth the time and effort to understand that there are alternatives. So communication and trust is important. Negotiation will help to create that trust, and it's a process of creating and understanding trust and deciding whether trust is justified. And there's a game that I play in a lot of other courses or workshops where there's smaller groups. We have a game, but I'll go through it really quickly. We can't do it as a game here, but there's a bunch of negotiation games which I think really illustrate the importance of kind of the ongoing relationship. So here's the prisoner's dilemma. This is a fairly simple game theory problem. You might have seen it already, but I'll just very quickly describe it. You've got two people, we'll call Bob and Alice. They're arrested near burglary, and they're questioned separately. And the important thing here is they're separate. They can't communicate with each other. And each one has to choose whether they're going to confess and implicate the other or be silent. And here's the problem. This is the dilemma. If neither one of them says anything, they're still going to go to jail for a year because they're carrying burglar tools, something else, but for a short time. If each one confesses and implicates the other, they're both going to go to jail for a longer time. So say 5 years. But if one of them confesses and the other one stays silent, so one of them cooperates with the police and the other one doesn't confess, then the one who cooperates goes free and the other one goes to jail for 10 years, twice as long. So what do you do? And it's by show of hands. How many people confess? Right, just a couple. How many keep silent? I'm sorry, all of you silent people are probably going to jail. Because I'll skip over that and the payoff table. Here's the problem, why the rational action is to confess. Because that confessing produces the best result, no matter what the other person does. And you can't know what the other person's going to do. If you're silent and the other one confesses, you're going to go to jail for a long time. And you can't be sure that they're going to be silent. If you both confess, then you're both going to go to jail for the medium amount of time, but you're not going to be any worse off than they are. So for each individual, the best result is to confess, and that produces a situation where they both have to confess because they don't know what the other one is going to do. And they don't want to risk going to jail for 10 years. And maybe if they're lucky, they won't go to jail at all. So confessing is the best result because you don't have any information about what the other person's going to do. Even though it's less than the optimal result is if you could be sure both people were going to cooperate and you'd only go to jail for a short time. But if there's a series of negotiations, the whole thing changes. And this is another repeated negotiation. Now the payoff is a little bit different. But in this, you cooperate, you retaliate, and normally I do this in group situations where you pair up and each person has a card, and two cards. You play you cooperate or you don't cooperate in each time. And you can see from this that if both people cooperate, there's a total of 6 points, and you split it. If only one person cooperates and the other person doesn't, the person who doesn't gets 5 points, and the one who's nice gets nothing. But if they're both retaliate, if they both refuse to cooperate, then they lose points. And I've done games where you do this in series, and where we've had results with two groups. It's amazing to see the results. And some they finish way negative because they just kind of keep retaliating against each other and losing points. And others learn very quickly what the best solution is. And in this game, you can talk. In this game, you can agree to cooperate. You can decide before you play your cards what you're going to do. And the best solution in this game is the tit-for-tat strategy. And this game has been run in real life and in computer simulations with all kinds of variations and strategies. And this one is always the most successful. And the way it works is you start off by cooperating. And as long as the other person cooperates, you keep cooperating. And you split evenly the maximum amount of points. And that is the best result. If you can get to that result, and I've done this game with various groups, and always there's some group that recognizes this right off, and they cooperate. And they just keep cooperating and amassing all the points, and they get the maximum number of points. But to make it work, if the other person stops cooperating, you have to retaliate right away. You can't continue to be a good guy and say, well, maybe they'll cooperate on the next round. So you cooperate for a couple times, and then one person says, oh, I can get 5 points instead of 3, so this time I'm going to get the extra points. And the only way you can deal with that is on the very next round, you retaliate, even if you know that it's going to result in both of you losing points, because you have to punish them. So you cooperate, but you punish bad behavior right away, and then you forgive them right away. If they're willing to go back to cooperating, you go back to cooperating. And then the final point is generosity. You've got to be willing to give up points. You've got to be willing to share the points evenly, and to win this game, you've got to be able to accept a result where you're both going to end up with the same number of points at the end. And then there's one last trick to this game, and that is that you have to continue to play enough series, and I usually do 10 or 15 rounds. It's very quick because each series is only a couple minutes, and just to give people time to talk and decide what they're going to do next. And so you can do this in 15 minutes or half an hour and play enough rounds to make it worthwhile, to make the result significant. Because you've got to be able to affect their behavior. It's got to go on for a while. And then at the end of the game, it's important that the strategy works best if nobody knows when the game is going to end. Because if you announce in advance that this is the last round, what do? Who retaliates? Who cooperates in the last round? Hands? You keep cooperating? Who retaliates in the last round? Tries to grab those extra points because it's the last time you're going to do it and they can't. That's what happens. So if you know when the game is going to end in the last round, it makes some sense to stop cooperating and try to grab those last few extra points. But if both of you have the same idea, you're both going to lose points. So you take your chances. But But the game illustrates a very important reality about negotiation in all kinds of settings. And that is, if there's an ongoing relationship and there's a benefit to cooperating and to working together to achieve a better result than you would get on your own, of not trying to grab every last advantage for your own benefit, because there's going to be another negotiation down the road, and what you win this time, you might lose next time, then this kind of strategy and this kind of cooperative behavior results over in the long run in a better result. So this is a concept of BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is very important in any kind of interest-based negotiation. And that is understanding what the alternatives are. If you can't negotiate a settlement, if you can't negotiate a deal in this negotiation, what are your alternatives? And what's your best alternative? Because your best alternative is what sets your bottom line. If I know that I can go to a car dealer across the street and buy another car that is almost as good, but not quite exactly what I want, for $30,000, I'm not going to sit here and pay $35,000 for this car. My BATNA is the car that's available across the street for $30,000. And if I can get this one for less than $30,000, then I'm going to buy this one. If I can't get this one for less than $30,000, there's my alternative. And the car dealer knows that too. The salesman knows that. That's why they ask you, if you're shopping for a car, they always ask you, well, what other cars are you looking for? Because they want to know what your alternatives are. They want to know and understand how far you're willing to go, how much value you place on what they're offering versus what someone else is offering. And they can address your BATNA. Well, you know, that car that gets much worse mileage than this car, so it's going to cost you way more to run it over the next 5 years than this car. So, yeah, it's cheaper, but it's going to cost you more in the long run. You should buy my car. And you work with the BATNA. You try to improve yours, undermine the other person's, which improves the value of the deal that you've got here. Communication is key. What you say often is less important than how you say it. And tone and body language and the personal dynamics are a big part of negotiation. And what's going on in your head and what's going on in the other person's head has a big effect on the outcome of a negotiation. One of the things that's important to remember, that's very important to think about, and that is that understanding and recognizing, acknowledging what the other person's saying doesn't mean that you're agreeing, that you're compromising your position, or that you're conceding anything. And so that's when you're sitting across the table, you're negotiating with somebody, and you're trying to achieve some sort of understanding. It's important to communicate that you do understand. You understand their position. You don't agree with it. You can't agree with it for this reason or that reason, or there's something else that they're missing. But you understand and you recognize, what they're saying. A lot of negotiation breaks down over misunderstanding and a failure to acknowledge that, yeah, that's a valid point, but I'm sorry, I can't do that. Let's talk about something else, rather than just no. And the other thing is that your own emotions, your own reactions, your subconscious can really affect your ability to negotiate things effectively. And there's another little game here, and this is something that we can do. in a big group. It might get a little noisy if everybody does it out loud, but I'd like you to do this out loud. It's called a Stroop test, and what it is, it's a series, I'll put it up in a sec. It's a series of words and colors. And what you need to do, as quickly as you can when I put this slide up, is read the color in the lines. Don't read the word. Out loud, read the color. Okay, so when this comes up, go ahead. You going? When you get completely confused, you can stop. Did anybody make it to the end, just by a show of hands? Did anybody? There's always a few people. Yeah, very good. I'm sorry. I've never been able to make it past about the third or the fourth line. I'm way too literal. I read the words all the time. Other people who aren't, and it has to do with right side, left side of your brain and all that kind of stuff, get much further. And those people who can do that, I have a great admiration for you. You can disconnect those words and colors. What happens in your brain is that the processing of the words interferes with naming the colors. You start reading the words. Most people do that. At some point, as it gets more jumbled, they start reading the words. And it's a conflict, right brain, left brain conflict. And there's a lot of thought processes. There's a lot of emotional processes that trigger that same conflict. And there's a lot of negotiation that triggers that conflict, where somebody says something and you just react. And you react far faster than you can think. And your face turns red and you get angry, or your position change, body posture changes, and you can't control that. People can work on controlling it, and people in very tense negotiation situations have to work very hard at controlling that. But it's something that is kind of baked into all of us, and we react. And I've been at some seminars that go into this in some detail, and the physical kind of an unconscious response is about 10 times faster than our conscious response when we're faced with something. When somebody says something, when somebody does something, if somebody gestures, if they look like they're going to hit you, whatever the situation. That subconscious response is so many times faster than our conscious response that we can't do anything about it other than kind of react to it. But we can try to control it, and we can understand that it's happening, and we can see it. When we see it happening in other people, we can deal with it. And so a lot of that communication is false communication. People seem angry, they're not angry. I have a colleague at our office that whenever he's put on the spot and a client says, well, I want an answer, yes, no, he laughs. It's just a kind of it's a nervous reaction, and he laughs. But from the person on the other side, you think, well, you're laughing at me? What did I say? What did I do? It's a nervous response. You have to be able to recognize it. You have to be able to deal with it if you're going to be negotiating, and recognize it in the people you're negotiating with. Also recognize that there are three very common negotiation styles. There are people who are competitors, accommodators, and avoiders. And it's pretty constant. People generally fall into one or the other, or one of the three, I mean. And it's important if you're negotiating to recognize what you are. And I know what I am. I'm an accommodator. I'm always trying to, make a deal and find a way to make it something work, or And not just that I'm going to accommodate my position, but I'm going to try to accommodate other people's positions as well, or find ways for them to accommodate, which is, and it's in the middle intentionally, because the people that are competitors and avoiders are just kind of like, it's like oil and water. I mean, there's no way that they can communicate. The competitor is a person who will keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing until they get a reaction. And the person who's the avoider is the one who keeps stepping back, and not wanting to confront. And that's just, those two don't get anywhere. If you're a person who's an accommodator, you've got to recognize the competitor and that you've got to push back at times. And vice versa, if a person who's an accommodator is dealing with somebody who wants to avoid what the person who wants to accommodate and to make a deal needs to do is find a way to engage them, to get the person who avoids the problem, avoids the negotiation, to actually engage in it. So, I mean, I think that if your style is accommodation and you engage in kind of interest-based type negotiations, you can negotiate effectively with the other two types. I think it's much more difficult if you recognize in yourself that you just avoid confrontation, avoid negotiation. It's much more difficult to negotiate effectively. And a person who recognizes that they're in themselves that they're very competitive have also got to understand that then that can scare people away, cause some people that they want to deal with to just simply, leave or refuse to engage, or if you're going to if you're negotiating with another competitor, recognize that you're just going to kind of keep beating on each other until somebody gives up. But I think for everybody, it's very important to kind of analyze yourself, to kind of look into yourself and say, well, what style of person, which of these three do I feel most comfortable with and do I fall into? Because you've got to adapt how you negotiate things to reflect your style. If you're not naturally a competitive person, a competitive negotiator, trying to become one is self-defeating. If your natural style is otherwise, what you should try to do is improve your performance using that style and techniques that reflect that style to get a better result. If you're a person who just wants to avoid a conflict and negotiation, I think then you've got to think really about how effective you can be. I mean, then you've got to do something to change yourself into one of the other styles, and maybe be try to develop some of the negotiation skills to be able to be more effective. And less avoiding. But recognize those styles in the other people that you're negotiating with as well, because you can adapt what you're doing to their style. You have to be assertive, I think, in any kind of negotiation. I mean, you just have to be. You have to ask for what you want. You have to stand your ground. You have to make your point and try to achieve what your goal is. And to do that effectively, you have to be assertive. You've got to be willing to push a bit. But empathy is important as well. And empathy is just simply the ability to recognize what the other person's needs and wants are and why they want them. There's a big difference between being empathetic and being sympathetic. Between being empathetic and acknowledging what they want, what they need, and just simply agreeing with them, or saying, oh yeah, I know you really should have this. You really, I mean, we should do better. We should, you really deserve that raise. Is not effective. kind of sympathetic tone. Being empathetic is, I understand why you need the raise. I mean, it's tough. Prices are going up. Food's more expensive. The Canadian dollar's gone down, and you need to pay for that vacation down south. And yeah, I understand, but we don't have any money. Sorry, I empathize with you, but we can't pay you. But maybe there's something else we can do, and then you get into other things. But being sympathetic, oh yeah, the company's terrible, they're scrounging. I mean, I can't believe that they won't pay you what you really deserve. I mean, that's the difference between empathetic, and sympathetic doesn't get you anywhere. But you've got to be both, assertive, empathetic. Active listening is important, and truly understanding what people are saying, acknowledge the other person's perspective. I understand perfectly all of your reasons for wanting this, for needing this, for asking for this. That doesn't mean that you agree, or that you're going to agree, or that you're going to just concede your point. I mean, understanding is important in its own right and is necessary in successful negotiation. Flexibility, being open to other options, and pragmatism of being able to accept the best available option. I've dealt with a lot of clients, software developers, inventors, and people who have small startup companies. And the thing that they fail in negotiating all the time is they have a chronic inability to say yes. Whatever's offered, there's something better around the corner. There's, if we just tweak it a little bit, we can make it better, and then somebody else is going to pay more for it. And they're never willing to just say, yes, this is the best available option that I have today to make a deal. And the deal I make today is worth way more to me than the deal I might make 2 weeks from now. And it's not the deal I was looking for, and it's not the ideal amount of money or ideal terms. There's something wrong with it, but it's good enough. And so many people just don't have the ability to do that, to be pragmatic and say, okay, that's good enough. We talked about interests and positions, needs versus wants, and I think the interests line up with the needs, positions are the wants. And to be successful, to be really effective, you have to get beyond the positions and what people want, and really start to explore and understand what their underlying interests and what the real needs are. You separate the people from the problem, and one of the really good things that I read a long time ago is you need to be soft on the person and hard on the problem. So if you've come to an impasse, you attack the problem, you don't attack the person. You show as much goodwill towards the person you're dealing with as possible. And if possible, you engage them so that it becomes a mutual problem, and you attack the problem together. So you work together, you attack the problem, you don't attack each other. And the result is that even in a win-lose kind of situation, you end up with a better result because you've got a bond, you've got a relationship between the people. Considering other options I talked about before, just be flexible and look for alternatives. Use objective alternatives. Try to find something outside the room or the confines of your negotiation that will give you something that you can hang on to. If you're negotiating rent for space at Mars, look at what space is going for in other buildings as an objective alternative. This is the market rent. Why should I pay more? Why should you pay less? But if you can find objective alternatives, something that everybody can agree on as a benchmark, then it's much easier to negotiate around that. Look for win-win solutions. I talked about that quite a bit, but I think there's always situations where you can improve the total benefit to everyone, and ways to improve the BATNA. So a couple minutes left, and maybe some time for questions. I'll talk about dispute resolution, because that's something I've been involved in quite a bit lately. And this is just kind of a pyramid of negotiation. We've been talking about that. I'll talk about mediation and arbitration as things that you should be aware of as ways to achieve results, to settle conflicts that can't be negotiated. And mediation, I think, is particularly important, and it works in all kinds of situations. A lot of startup companies that have problems that just become impasses, and mediation is a way to break an impasse. Is very effective because you bring in a third party, a neutral person, who can help both parties to achieve a better result than they can achieve on their own, or in some cases, to achieve any result at all. And there's really two general approaches to mediation that are followed. The one that I think has a lot of benefits in a lot of situations is the interest-based mediation. It just builds on all of the things that I've been talking about tonight. But the mediator is a facilitator. The mediator creates an environment and creates a process where the parties can focus on interests, not on legal rights and obligations, can bring forward through techniques like brainstorming and other techniques that mediators are trained in, options for creative solutions. And particularly where people are very dug into positions, and despite all of the efforts and all of the kinds of things and approaches that I've talked about tonight, you can't budge them, or neither one will budge. A mediator who comes in as a neutral person can often create that kind of movement. And I mean, you see lots of mediation in things like labor negotiation or international diplomacy and peace talks, but you can bring it down to a very basic level of a dispute among shareholders in a startup company who can't agree on what direction that company is going to take. You know, do we borrow a lot of money and expand, or do we save our money and just grow slowly? And they're at fundamental loggerheads, and they can't agree on anything. Mediation can sometimes help them to bridge that. The other is evaluative mediation, which is normally you find in kind of a court setting, or where there's a lawsuit going on, and now in Toronto, in most civil lawsuits there's mandatory mediation, and other places there is as well, and that's often a retired judge or someone else who's brought in as a mediator. And what they will do is they will do a neutral evaluation. Your case is good, your case is not so good. You're claiming this much, but your case isn't worth that much. It's more based on legal rights and obligations, but it has the benefit of a third party who's knowledgeable and trusted by both sides to say, this is what the case is worth, you should settle. And it's a little more complicated than that, but often those cases do settle. Generally, I think the success rates in that kind of court related mediation is probably about 80%, sometimes higher. But most lawsuits settle. Almost all lawsuits settle. Very few lawsuits ever go to trial. What mediation can do is help them to settle earlier and help them to settle better. And earlier is usually better because they're not paying thousands of dollars in legal fees as the case goes on. I'm saying that in my capacity as a mediator, not my capacity as a lawyer. Like, as a lawyer, the longer you fight, the better it is. And so what what are the benefits of mediation and what do you look for in a mediator? One is subject area knowledge. And particularly in dealing with technology, dealing with companies, private companies particularly, and any kind of partnership or joint venture. Some knowledge about the subject matter in the area I think is important because there's just simply more credibility than in what the mediator has to offer. And that doesn't mean that the mediator decides anything. The mediator never decides anything. It's up to the parties to decide. But if the mediator knows something about it, they can suggest things, they can offer alternatives, they can give you different avenues to pursue that may help you to settle or to negotiate a solution. Mostly what the mediator offers is skills in the negotiation and mediation process and creating an environment that lets the parties make decisions without some of the underlying baggage and conflict that they've been involved in and that have caused the negotiation to break down in the first place. So it's really about changing the dynamic and having a third party, a neutral person in the room or involved in the discussions can really make a significant change. The other part is being creative and offering solutions and taking a problem-solving approach, because the whole idea is break the impasse, change the dynamic. And then finally, patience. You've just got to be willing to keep working with people way past the point where any rational person would give up hope that they're ever going to agree on anything. And I've had mediations that have almost broken down because parties couldn't agree on where to meet. But you keep working at it, and eventually you can come to a positive result. And mediation's effective for that reason, because you only settle if both parties agree that settlement is better than the alternative. Whether the alternative is going to court or the alternative is splitting up the company or abandoning the project or whatever it is, if you can agree that what's being proposed in the mediation and what you're talking about is better than that alternative, then you've got the basis to settle. The slides, I've included some resources, some books that I think are really excellent books. If any of you are familiar with them, you know this already, and probably you know that a lot of what I've talked about today comes from these books, particularly the Getting to Yes book, which has been updated many times. It says 1991, but they've updated it fairly regularly. And kind of the whole interest-based negotiation approach, that book goes into it a great deal of depth. That if you're interested in improving your own negotiating skills and being more effective, and being more aware of what other people are doing when you're negotiating with them, and being ready to counter what they're doing with negotiation techniques and tactics of your own to get a better result. I would really strongly recommend any of these books, because these, plus a lot of practice and a lot of experience in just doing negotiations, I think will make you a better, more successful negotiator and make you better and more successful at the other things that you're doing, you're trying to achieve. And I hope that you are successful in what you're trying to achieve. That's, I think, the point of this series. And I hope that some of the ideas tonight will help you to do that. I'm happy to answer some questions if you have any.